Generally, when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, being a dick is disencouraged from GMs and players because it stops the fun for everyone most of the time. There is one exception though, and that is the mix-up one-shot game that I played called Tarrasque for Sale. And if you've never played it before, I will explain it for you. This is the story of one such occasion where I played it and had a good time, even though it was about killing players and making their deaths as meaningless and difficult as possible. If you've never played Tarrasque for Sale, the basic premise is that there are multiple tables of players who each first design a dungeon and then swap that dungeon with another table and then play through it. The dungeon has to be designed to stop the players from leaving with we had 5 gems to protect while we were designing the dungeon. Basically the MacGuffins to see who does the best and kills the most stuff and dies the least. Those were the criteria for the winning team. I was GMing one table that was very excited about creating a dungeon, and they came up with some very inventive ideas that, because they were going for super sneaky, didn't quite go off how they expected it, because always players throw spanners in the works. But there was a lot of fun stuff that happened. So the team was called the Wedding Planners because they wanted their dungeon to start when the players entered. There was a kobold and a goblin getting married. It was very romantic. The goblin was in his nice tuxedo, and the kobold, she was in a veil, and they were kissing. It was very romantic, and he did the dip, and then they were like, "Oh, hi there." But he just turned around, and this is what I was told to say to the players: "You right, dickheads?" Which wasn't the friendliest response, which kind of got on the wrong side of the players. Well, not the wrong side, the exact right side that I meant to be, but either way, didn't endear my character to them. And unfortunately for them, this goblin was an integral part of how to get the gems. Every interaction that they had at the beginning of this dungeon resulted in the goblins calling them dickheads. They were like, why are you in here? I was like, well, I'm employed to be here. I'm protecting the gems. What do you think I'm being here for, dickheads? This encounter was mostly designed to waste the players' time, so they had less of it to get the gems. Unfortunately, because the goblin was so aggressive and combative towards the players, they basically decided to kill him. So let me describe the first room of this dungeon that we had, pre-generated by the way. It was quite a long room. It was big and tall, and it had 2 pillars with a big rope between them, and underneath the rope, basically stretching across the middle of the room, splitting it in 2, was a bottomless crevasse. What the players didn't realise was, once they'd stepped into the room, there was a lot of grease designed to make them slide right in. Didn't turn out that way because fortunately they all got their dex saves, but stupidly they decided that the best idea would be to jump over the crevasse of bottomless darkness, and unfortunately one of them got a critical fail. So instead of just sliding into the thing, being all dramatic and trap-like, they just kind of jumped in. And that was 5 minutes into the game? I tried to stop them. I was telling them, like, there's a rope there, which made them very suspicious, unfortunately, of the rope because they thought it would be trapped. Despite the druid using detect magic as a cantrip, saying, no magic, it's not a magic. And they were like, well, it's probably trapped mechanically then. It's like, it wasn't, it was just a rope. Which is always the danger with this particular game. Misdirection and the players second guessing themselves is unfortunately usually their own demise. So one of them jumped and that was their fighter, jumped straight into the bottomless crevasse 5 minutes into the game and just fell forever. So the goblin was told by the designers to tightrope walk along this rope because there was secrets there. I mean, it was just a rope, there was nothing special about the rope, but its location was important. The goblin was tightrope walking, and the thief just walks up and wobbles it, which made the goblin do a check, which he got a 3 on or something, and he just fell to his death. And his wife, distraught, is like, I just married him, why would you do this? And I'm like, shut up. And she got an arrow to the knee and fell in as well. At this point, they discovered that there was actually a couple of doorways, very easy to see. Literally, they were on the map and they tried to go around this giant crevasse. Very easy to get around, apart from one side which was blocked by a big metal door. What are they called? The metal spiky doors that have holes in them. Whatever, those things. They had to fight a orc in there with a flying animated sword. That was pretty easy for them. And then they kind of lifted up the gate and got through. Super easy. But not before it was the thief's turn to decide to try and jump the crevasse. Anyway, he failed his roll, and because it wasn't a critical fail and the players didn't spend that much points on the bottomless pit, I decided it was him clinging by his fingertips to the opposite side, and fortunately he managed to climb up. And I really wish I'd killed both of them, but whatever. It was one of those decisions. I was like, there are plenty of other bloodthirsty traps in this place, so don't worry about it. Unfortunately for the thief, as he got up, he stepped directly over an invisible chest by completely critically failing a perception check. He could have literally tripped over an invisible chest with one of the gems in it, but no druid to cast detect magic, no anyone. It was unfortunate, but they had bigger problems on their hands. They had a decision to make. Would they go left? Would they go right? Or would they stay in this room and deal with what was at the other end of it, which was 3 gems? 3 very inviting gems. Anyway, what they decided was the ranger would go off one way, the thief, the barbarian and the druid would go off the other way, and the thief would stay in this room and inspect the gems. So they split the party, and that was interesting, because the ranger managed to go into the rooms where the cool stuff was and basically activate the traps, but the ranger didn't go back at all, so they didn't get any of the traps activated on them. All they managed to do was get their hand stuck in a mimic chest, and because they couldn't roll for shit, they ended up stuck there for most of the game. Also, they couldn't do any damage to kill the thing, so that took them ages. Eventually, by the end of the game, they had killed the mimic, and there was a gem hidden underneath it, so really, it ended up pretty good. Meanwhile, the thief decided there was no point in checking any of these gems, or whether they were anything like the gems they were after. So, they picked them up, and one by one just activated trap after trap. There were 3 of them. One was a mimic, which they didn't touch, actually. One had fear cast on it to activate when it was touched, and the other was attached to an arrow trap. So, first off, this reactivating arrow trap speared them a couple of times because they picked it up twice. And then the fear one just made the ranger and then the barbarian who picked it up after run away. Important fact to remember: the gems that they were after couldn't have things cast on them because they were resistant to magic, but they didn't think about that. Either way, all 3 of those gems were fake. And that brings us to the wizard, who actually managed to figure out what was going on in this dungeon. The wizard, incredibly smartly, went into a room, realised there was a darkness spell on the area, and just cast Shatter and Thunderwave on the inside of it to just destroy the doppelganger and the ghoul who were in there. To first, ghoul drops from the ceiling to paralyze, or attempt to paralyze, whoever went in there, and then the doppelganger would just stroll out, dressed and looking like them. That didn't work because the druid was just going zap, zap, zap. And that trap, while cool, did not unfortunately go off. Good idea. Players just got round it. No gems in there either way, didn't really matter. What they did find was a pressure plate labelled number 3 or something. So after all this, they discovered most of the dungeon, and in each corner of the dungeon, spread out, were 4 pressure plates, labelled 1 to 4. And they found out that by standing on them they clicked, but independently they didn't do anything. As they stood there in each corner of the dungeon on these pressure plates, they heard a kind of ka-chunk and trapdoor opening sound, and the little tinkle of 3 gems falling into a never-ending pit. So what they failed to see with their perception checks was a hidden trapdoor in the ceiling, concealed and made to look like the ceiling. It was not difficult, but they just didn't get a high enough roll. And they certainly didn't detect magic in the right place to see that there were gems in there. And that was right above the rope, which was above the endless abyss. Once all 4 pressure plates were activated, that opened the trap door. Unfortunately, the person who was meant to catch the things was the goblin who they killed. They all found this very funny, fortunately, because I was really expecting them to just go, "Oh, that's bullshit, table flip!" That didn't happen. They all had a good time. After their entire dungeon crawl, they found 1 gem underneath a mimic, almost tripped over another one, but didn't in an invisible chest, and dropped 3 and their fighter into a bottomless pit. And that's Tarask for Sale, a game about being a dick building a dungeon, trying to kill your players, which is generally never encouraged. Thank you for watching. This was at one point exclusive for patrons, so I imagine if you're listening to this now, it's been released into the wild. Or you're a patron and you're amazing. I love you. Thank you so much. Kill your players sometimes. But until then, mustache.